I can set up in days or weeks that would take months or years to build custom.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Analysis Paralysis. Today I'm here with Dan Fellars from Openside, and we're talking about all things Airtable. If you're unfamiliar with Airtable at all, it's a very user-friendly database software. Think of Google Sheets, Excel, but it has a bit more structure in that it can actually be used at a mass scale for business processes. We talk about how you can leverage automation and the ever-evolving cloud software tools space to build custom solutions, all without the traditional development overhead. And that's essentially where Dan has transitioned his company from to. So enjoy the episode.
Yeah, so I have an interesting background school-wise. I studied undergrad economics at BYU in Utah.
Okay.
And my senior year in college, trying to figure out, what I was going to do. I didn't really love economics, but it was actually the shortest major at the university, so I stuck with it. But I was working for an internet company, so I graduated in 2000. So 99 and 2000 was the heyday of the .com.
Yep.
And so I was working for an internet company, but on the project management side, and was interacting with the engineers as just, as a student intern, and was like, man, I have no idea what these guys are talking about. So I decided, actually, my wife was like, you should go to this open house for the computer science department. So I was like, sure, I'll check that out. I'd never done programming or anything really up to that point. But so I went to that and then decided to take the intro to computer science class that they offered the next semester. And so I took that and just completely fell in love with software engineering and development. So I completely changed the direction of my career. I took a couple more computer science classes while I was still finishing my degree in economics.
What was it in that first computer science class that grabbed your attention? Was it a certain language that you were using, or just the idea of like object-oriented programming, or just problem solving? Like what was the thing that really pulled you in?
I think it was just building something and seeing something that you built actually run, and the challenge, the puzzle solving of like hitting your head against the wall of trying to figure out why this thing isn't compiling and generating the output that you want it to. And so that problem solving nature of like figuring out, and then the satisfaction of once it worked and it completed the way that it was supposed to, just the enjoyment. I think partly, doing economics is a lot of theoretical analysis and whatnot, which is good, but you don't finish with something more tangible. So that really appealed to me.
Yeah, so you were able to essentially take your skill set and immediately apply it, because I know a lot of people go to school and they'll learn something, psychology, philosophy, English majors, for example. And then it's like they get out of school and they're like, okay, well, now what? Or even just like a business major. It's like, so do I start a business, or like what really is even my skill set? Like I took a bunch of marketing courses and I don't really know what to do. Whereas something like coding and programming, the fact that in your free time, you're probably building some projects out and really embracing it. And you could probably even start getting some work while you're going to school. And you very quickly see, hey, you can make money doing this. This is a career, and I enjoy doing it. So that's awesome that you went through that.
Yeah.
So then, how did you kind of get started with your company, and what did it initially start off as?
Yeah, so I worked as a software engineer for many years in California, San Diego area, where I'm from, and but always kind of had that interest in the business. My original plans were to go into finance and banking or something along those lines. So always kind of originally had that business interest before I went the technical engineering route. So after about 6 years working for a startup in San Diego, it was actually a gaming company. We were building some games, which is kind of cool on the engineering side. I kind of was like, I'm ready for the next step. I wanted to get more on the business side, and I met with the management team, was like, hey, I want to get more exposure to marketing or strategy. And they kind of like put me in the engineering box, was like, hey, that's great that you want to expand, but we really need you to finish these 20 projects that are on your plate. And so I could never like break out of that mold of being, one of the engineering team members.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's ultimately I decided, like, okay, I'm going to go back and get an MBA. And so I came back to Utah and did the MBA program at BYU. And that really opened my eyes up more to the business world, and in particular venture capital. And I interned with a venture capital firm and actually ended up working with them full time for about 6 months after I graduated. And
well, so question about that, because like this is something that I'm definitely interested in. I went to school for business, and I didn't go the path of MBA because, my freshman year I started a business and I was just putting everything into it. But a few of my friends kind of went the MBA route. What was it about going into that program? Like when you got out, was it just you were more of a fit for these companies to take, a leap with you being an MBA student, or did you make connections within the program with people that somehow connected you to, the VC area? Like what was it about school that got you essentially your first job in that area?
Yeah, for sure. The internship, so they were looking for MBA students. And really my technical background and being an engineer was what put me above the other people, and actually really was my first foray into systems automation. Because what they were doing, they were a fairly new venture firm and they needed some help setting up their CRM.
Ooh.
And so the one big thing that I helped them a lot with the companies, they were investing in technology companies, but a big part of what I did for them was configure Salesforce for them. And so that was really what helped me get in the door. So not only, I was in the business world, the business school I went to had a venture capital student fund that the students would actually invest. And so that got me exposure into the VC world.
Interesting.
And,
so
yes.
You've worked with Salesforce, and I'd be curious, like maybe to take a step further, because I want to take a step back afterwards. But when did you actually get to the point of wanting to start your own business, and then what was it in? Like, what did you focus on? Was it web development or CRM? Like having Salesforce background, like what was that business?
So so it was definitely a software business, having a software background. After the VC firm, I worked with a healthcare publishing company and eventually became the CEO of that company. And one of the biggest challenges I had running that company, and it was a short company, I was just there for just a short period of time. But the biggest challenge that I saw on the marketing side was all the different systems that they were using. Every marketing channel had its own software, and none of them talked together. And we just had to you had to just deal with each one individually. So early on, I recognized this need of trying to integrate and automate across systems. And so my original concept was actually an open source product that would kind of be a way for third-party developers, similar to like WordPress, but for marketers, where people could build their own plugins that could do some kind of marketing function. And I wanted to build this base software system that third-party developers would then build plugins to. So that was the original idea. Realized getting into it that it was a bit more bigger than I could handle. But I did get pretty far with it. And once I got to a point where I could demonstrate it, I actually started showing it to a few companies. And I got 2 companies early on that said, hey, this is cool. Could it be flexible enough to tailor to our internal use case of what we need built? And so it kind of evolved into a custom application software shop.
Okay.
And that kind of was for several years, probably the first 5 or 6 years. And actually, I still have legacy customers that are built on top of that software stack that we built.
It's interesting. So you were in a sense trying to build like a product, and then you got forced into a service business. Like I still consider custom development like that's a service business at the end of the day.
Correct.
So like you start off on the right foot. Like let's build a product, and that's super scalable. Software as a service. Obviously, everything's blowing up across the board. To scale it, it doesn't take that much more to take on like one more client. But once you start getting heavily custom, then it takes up a lot of man hours to do that. So it's interesting to kind of hear that you went through that, and now, based on what I know of you at the moment, it almost sounds like that you're trying to move back into that product space, once again, now that you have a better idea of the needs of the market and finding a little bit of a niche within there. So I'd be curious kind of how you went through that path. How did you go, kind of circle back to where you began?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I always knew that product was where, it's what has the highest margins, the most scalable. And so I always knew that. But a lot of it went to my philosophies on fundraising. Like having worked in venture capital, raising money and getting seed money wouldn't have been hard. I know all the venture capitalists,
Sure. Yeah.
Locally, as well as many in the Bay Area. But it never resonated with me personally on the way that I wanted to build my business. And so that's where, the service route is very common way to go, bootstrapped approach to generate revenue.
Yeah, I mean, you're immediately trading your hours for money in a service-based business. Right. And I think that's one of the big things that Gary talks about all the time as well, Gary Vaynerchuk, where he essentially started a service business, and everyone was like, why? There's so much VC money flying around like crazy. And he's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I want to do this. I want to build a business versus there's so many people that will just get tons of venture backing. They'll build something, it will fail, and then they just kind of like ruin their name, and they just made a little bit of a mistake on everyone else's dime. So I too have been very turned off by the VC space. I've paid a lot of attention to it. I've obviously not been as involved as you have, but just listening to podcasts and obviously loving Shark Tank and all of that. But you're essentially giving up a percentage of your business. And I was listening to a really interesting podcast the other day where they were talking about Behance and how they were acquired by Adobe. And the founder, he was running the numbers because he never actually wanted to sell. The idea was never to actually sell or be acquired and go that kind of VC route in any regard. And he said that he ran the numbers, and at that point, when Adobe was showing interest, them getting acquired for $300 million was no different than if they were to stick it out and raise more money and grow and then eventually sell for like $600-700 million. Because at the end of the day, you dilute yourself. And the payday is the exact same regardless of if you sell now or 2 years from now. And it's this really interesting aspect of, it doesn't always make sense to just keep, raising more and more money. Sometimes it just makes sense to just focus on building your business or selling at that point or something like that. It was just a very interesting thing that I would have never really thought about.
Yeah, for me, it was like I'm not against the VC model. Like I still actually have several clients that are VC firms and friends within the industry. But I also saw like what that path looks like. The VC firm that I worked with was a late stage investor. And so I saw amazing companies that were, on an IPO track. And I saw like what was required to go down that path. And that exposure really opened my eyes. Like, I don't think if I didn't know what that looked like, I probably would have gone down that path had somebody been willing to write me a check. And so I think it was good to get that experience and just know for myself that, I mean, these are cool companies, like they're super impressive, met some amazing people, but for what I wanted to do, it just didn't align with my personal goals. So.
Well, so what are your personal goals then? So you have a business that, has some stability and, service-based primarily, but you're building into some of the product. Is the goal just to build some kind of like a lifestyle business with, I don't know, 5, 10 employees and just do well, treat your employees well, and just have something that you have control over?
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely more in line. I think, for me, a lot of it is definitely that financial independence. Another thing that plays into it is being a little bit older as an entrepreneur. So when I started my company, I already had 3 children, and my wife was pregnant with our 4th. And so that definitely factored into, I think, the decision of maybe going to maybe a little bit safer and service-oriented route. So that played into it. I think that definitely plays into the decisions I make now, as far as the amount of risk I'm willing to take and the path. So, I mean, I really like working for myself. Like my last company, I learned that having a boss that I didn't see eye to eye with, that actually is what pushed me to decide, okay, I'm ready to go on my own and do this for myself. So I think a lot that independence. I do like realizing, I mean, I'm not a complete introvert, but I probably prefer working by myself on a lot of things. And so that factors into it as well. So
how has your team broken out in any regard? Do you have any employees, or are you using like some subcontractors and pulling people in here and there? Like, where are you at with that, and where are you, I guess, hoping to be? Because that's a big question that I have for myself, and I'm always trying to figure it out. So
yeah, there's a weird, like, I don't know how it is where you are, but here in Utah, like Utah is growing a lot. The tech scene is pretty big right now. It's kind of a hub, and so there's a lot more venture money coming in, and so I interact with these CEOs of other companies and software companies, and all the metrics are around number of employees and amount of money raised. Like that's how you sort of define your worth within the world. And so I always struggle with that, is like, I don't really care about those 2 metrics, but I do want, I do have an ego to an extent, and want to compete. And so you struggle with that challenge of like, okay, do I try to grow and get more employees? So at one point I had 3 or 4 employees. When I made that change, it's been about 6 months now, when I decided to scale back on the custom software side of things and focus more on partnering. What I realized was just how hard it is to scale, the custom software approach. And really the hardest part was handing off the inherent knowledge that I have, being the primary developer of the code base. Trying to be able to hand that off to somebody was very challenging. And so when I decided, I said, and this goes back into Zapier, how I became familiar with Zapier. Well, I'll save that story. That's an interesting one.
Well, I guess so about that, because that's something that's obviously incredibly difficult. That when you start, especially in a service-based business, I think some of the goal is to grow it as much as you can on your own before you can justify hiring another employee. And it gets tough too, because it's like, you have to do more than $100,000 in revenue before you can really consider hiring someone for maybe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. And at that point, you're not paying yourself well. So it's definitely a scary dive. And I think that's something that I've been playing with for a bit too long now. I've been finally I'm at a point now where we've gotten a lot of growth, especially this year, that I need to start hiring more people in general. But I always go back to, like, my company is so efficient and there's so many things that are integrated and automated that, like, I don't need to hire someone because I'm not overwhelmed yet with client work, and I'm not turning client work away because I have so much, going on. But at the end of the day, you need to build a team and slowly start handing pieces off, like what you mentioned, hand a certain piece of development off, because 80% is better than that 100% that you would give yourself when you actually get to free up that amount of time with you. So making that leap is incredibly scary and difficult. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things, going from a solopreneur to actually having employees. And then, the risks and fears that come along with that. Now you have someone else on your payroll, and maybe you need to deal with health insurance and all the other things that come with that as well.
Yep. Yeah. So at our peak, the previous 2 years were good years. And so we had 3 employees, and mostly engineering, 1 marketing. And so when I made that change, as part of that, I actually had a couple clients that scaled back drastically on the custom development side. So I had to scale back the team, and especially as I shifted, I needed a different skill set as well. And so I'm actually right now without employees, with just contractors. My last employee, actually last Friday was his last day. And so now I definitely am in a little bit of a dip as I reposition myself and start to scale back up. But starting to see signs of scaling, which is good.
So have the people that have left, are they starting their own business in a similar industry, or are they going to a different company in some regard?
Yeah, they're all going to companies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's definitely got to be a difficult thing, but at the same time, like that's the thing that I've realized too, being in business, that like the connections that you build over time, the clients that you build, the name that you have, more people find you on Google organically, and just the connections. So like, whoever you partner with, there's just so many leads that kind of come to you organically the more you connect yourself. And at the end of the day, one of my mentors, he said to me, he actually was in a similar business to us, but specifically for Salesforce. And he said to me that, like, as much as my business was ABC Corp, he's like, Salesforce and everyone else knew of my business by my name. At the end of the day, you are your business. You're the brand of your business. That, at Salesforce, they're not yelling, hey, we need to get ABC Corp on this custom implementation. They say, no, we got to get Jim, right? Like that's really, you end up being the face of your company in this area, unless you go more heavily into the product. But then I even argue that it is good to be kind of a face of your business, even if you aren't a product in some regard as well.
Right. Which is good and bad, right? Because then, how do you transition that away to get other people to
for sure. It's the best thing and the worst thing. How do you set the expectations of a client that, hey, I'm on this initial call because we really need to understand the scope of your work, but and I'll be involved in the project here and there, but our team is great, and they are going to be the ones that are going to be jumping in. And the truth of the matter, the best way to sell that, I guess, is you hired a team that's better than you in certain aspects. So it's like, hey, I have this rock solid automation person, and you want them working on your project. You don't want me working on your project for that. Like, right. we can put everything together, but I think getting to that point, and it's tough to find that level of talent too, unless you can pay them, 6 figures to even get them on board. Or you start talking about, do I give up equity of my company? And it's like, does equity in your company even make sense when you're not looking to, get VC or your service-based business? Like, right. Equity doesn't make sense at that point. And, right. It's a very tough thing.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you.
So tell me a little bit about how, it makes a ton of sense as to why you found Zapier, because come on, you love integration, you're dealing with all this stuff. So I'm curious how, you got involved with Zapier, how you found it, where you started playing around with it, and kind of where that connection came into play.
Yeah. So I still remember when Zapier first, I think I saw it on Hacker News first, when it first came out. And I was already, this was, I don't remember what year they launched, but I
think 2012 or 2013.
2012, yeah. So I was already doing my own thing and kind of working towards, actually probably had a couple clients at that point. And, but that vision I had of this marketing platform, like the main component of it was integrating with different systems and, kind of being the UI to, maybe it didn't do like all the email sending or whatnot, but it was just the UI, and then it would talk to a backend API. And so when Zapier launched, I was like, oh my gosh, that is the vision of what I had.
Right? Yeah.
And they executed much better than I had, and had a much better designer than I had, and their UI was much slicker.
Hey,
And
well,
so
they went the VC route. I think right off the bat, very early on, they got about like 1.2, but then they just totally backed off. They became profitable quickly, and they haven't been doing anything with it.
Yeah, so I've followed them from the very early days, because I had a very similar concept, vision, idea in mind. Different use case a little bit, but anyways, over the years, what I would actually tell people was, I'd say, you've probably heard of Zapier, and they'd say yes, and I say, well, Zapier is great for basic integration, but at some point, it's not going to be able to do what you need it to do. And then that's when our custom solution comes in. And so I would always use Zapier almost as a negative, like, that's great for small projects or whatever, but you'll eventually outgrow it. And then that's when you come to us.
Sure.
And so when I started reevaluating my business 6 or 8 months ago, I went back to Zapier, and I looked at Zapier again, because I hadn't really played with it for the years, and I'd seen how much progress they made, and in particular, their developer environment. And I realized, I saw like, hey, you can build anything you want and run it on their infrastructure. And so if they can't do what my clients need out of the box, then I can build a better solution. And so we started doing that. And so one of my clients was using Zapier for some of the stuff that they just wanted real quick and dirty, send a Slack message or something. But they also used our platform for some of their more advanced stuff. And so I started reevaluating, like, okay, why couldn't we use Zapier to do this? And found that the CRM they were using, the connector for it on Zapier, was pretty limited. There was a lot of stuff that you couldn't do. So you really couldn't, out of the box with Zapier, do what they needed. And I said, well, we can build a better version that runs within Zapier and does what they need, and built that. And then it was like, okay, it took us a year to build this custom application. I can replace this in weeks running it within Zapier. And
That's
then
incredible.
The other sweet spot is you need something like an Airtable, which we rely heavily on. And so the combination of those, I can set up in days or weeks that would take months or years to build custom.
Oh, for sure.
So that was
just the monitoring infrastructure of it. I think that was something. I think anyone that gets involved with Zapier and they really start diving down the API and integration route, you get to a point where you're like, Zapier can actually start getting quite expensive. Maybe we should build our own internal infrastructure. And then you start thinking through it, and like, the simple fact that, like, if a Zap fails, it auto retries, or if way too many happen at once and they think maybe it's a bug, like, it'll hold on to it and you can tell it to go through. Like, just the infrastructure of reporting
or seeing the data in and out of every step.
Oh,
like
yeah.
That,
to build your own infrastructure, it makes literally no sense. And that's definitely, I think it's a great thing, but it's also a terrible thing, because, like, you're really building your company on someone else's software in a way. Correct. Which it's a little bit scary, right? But like, it does not make sense for you to build your own infrastructure at the end of the day. And the icing on the cake is that a client could come to you and they want you to integrate some random software that you've never heard of, and chances are there's a Zapier integration, and they probably don't need something crazy to happen where they need something custom. It could just be quick. So throw it in there. Like, you can literally have your custom integration go, and then the next step could just be a native Zapier integration. Do something super simple. And like, that's the beautiful aspect about using someone else's platform, though, in addition to just the reporting and infrastructure aspect.
Correct. Yep. Very true.
So when you got involved with this, did these clients of yours have their own Zapier accounts, or you said that a lot of people they've heard of Zapier. I definitely had a kind of an opposite experience, where even technical friends of mine, they had never heard of Zapier. And maybe one of the things is being based on the East Coast, and that's where things are a little bit different. But even like a few years ago, like, people that were very heavily into integration. They had never heard of Zapier, and that when I showed it to them, their eyes just like lit up. They're like, "Wow, this is a big thing." So the clients, what are the clients that you're looking at or working with that they've actually heard of Zapier, and were they already using it?
So, I mean, that would be like the VC firm who's,
Okay.
definitely would know of them. The
Yeah.
Hawaii, the client that we moved away from, they actually had Zapier without me telling them about it. So the CEO is not technical, but definitely interested in software solutions. So he's always out looking.
Mm.
Other industries, there. Um, we do some stuff in the marketing. So we've done a lot in the marketing space. So marketers typically have heard of it.
Okay. Well, it's actually interesting that our one of our largest clients right now is also actually a VC firm, and there's something that inherently VC firms can benefit substantially from having a nice CRM in place, and then also the automation and integration aspect, because often VC firms will be using things like PitchBook or various other program or databases online to find what's going on with the startups in the space, and like show me all of the startups in Series B that have raised more than $4 million in this specific space. Like, where else can you get that? Well, it's from one of those online databases. Well, now how do we take this information out and store it in your database, and then actually further go through it and manipulate it and do outreach and follow up and build relationships with people? CRM is so much at the core of that. So I'm curious what you've done with some of these VC firms. Did they already have a CRM in place? Was it something like Salesforce? How did you pull Airtable into the mix, or do you not use it with them? Like, what does that look like?
So the client, the client that I used to work with full time, that's on Salesforce, they still run on Salesforce. I'm pitching them on Airtable, and they've kind of explored Airtable for other types of projects, but not their core CRM. So they're still very much tied to Salesforce. But the other clients that I have, I actually found through Airtable. So they were already on Airtable or looking to adopt Airtable as their primary CRM, and then brought us in to implement that.
Well, so this is interesting. This is something that I didn't even realize. So you will actually pitch Airtable as a CRM replacement, because obviously Airtable is incredibly flexible. So is this something that you do often, or do you have many clients that have a CRM in place and they leverage Airtable? Because you could leverage Airtable regardless of what you're using.
So I probably don't pitch it as a CRM, but companies find us because they're already thinking of using Airtable as their CRM, or already started to, and then need somebody to really get it implemented. So I don't know that I would pitch it. Like, I love Airtable, but it can't replace everything that a CRM can do. But for certain use cases, some people, like one of the clients, which is a very large financial service company, they, most of the guys are familiar with Salesforce. They've used it at other previous firms. And the main guy who's running is like, I do not want to use Salesforce. I hate it. I love Airtable. This is what we want to build on. I was like, okay, we'll do it.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So usually they're finding me through Airtable. Any of my existing clients that I've had, they all still use a separate CRM. So I actually haven't moved any of my previous people off of their CRM onto Airtable.
Okay. Well, so for those who might be listening, I think Airtable, it's something that I bring up all the time. And I normally use it kind of in the back end. Maybe to explain a little bit what it is. I mean, it's essentially a database, a very, very, very user-friendly database, almost like an Excel or Google Sheets, but like more user-friendly and more powerful in so many different aspects. And at the core of what a CRM is a database. It stores, people, companies, opportunities, tasks, and things like that. And it just gives you a different kind of user interface to interact with it. Whereas Airtable, it's a little bit more raw. You're seeing the records that exist in each row and how things are related and correlated. And it is incredibly powerful to use as just a database, or you can really do anything with it. I know Kelsey Bratcher, who actually does the Get Automated podcast, he uses Airtable to track all of his guests that he has on the podcast. And he does a lot of like automated email marketing and things like that. And then automated posting to his social channels from Airtable. Like you can literally, he's using it essentially as a CRM, a podcast CRM. And it's incredibly powerful, and you could, make it be whatever you need it to be. So I totally see why you fell in love with it, and why, you use it as much as you have been. I'd be curious, what other software are you using aside from Airtable?
So for project management, we actually just moved to a new one called ClickUp.
Oh, okay.
That I actually love. It's project management, there's tons of them out there, and they all, have overlap, but ClickUp, for whatever reason, just sort of speaks to the way that I would set it up if I were to build something from scratch. So I really like ClickUp for project management.
What is it about it versus something like an Asana or a Trello, or using your CRM for project management? What is the difference?
So Asana, I know you use Asana.
Yep.
I tried to use Asana early on, and I don't know if I can remember what I didn't like about it, but it just didn't.
I hated it 3 years ago. I think three or 4 years ago. Yeah, I tried it. I hated it. Then I moved to Trello. I fully embraced Trello. Like I liked it, but I also didn't. And then I just slowly stopped using Trello. And then about a year and a half ago, I was in an incubation space, and this one guy there was using Asana, and I was like, do you actually like that? And he was like, yeah, I love it. And he was using the list view. I was always so used to, the board view. And when I saw him use the list view and I had him show me it, I was like, you know what? I will give this another try, and I'll try the list view, because that's really the core competency of Asana. Like the board view is really more of an afterthought, and they're going to have some functionality where you can switch between the two within a project, which has been a freaking requested feature for 3 years now. But I totally agree with you. I hated Asana. There's no guardrails. It's confusing. There's so many things going on. But they've definitely made a lot of progress over the past couple of years.
Interesting. Yeah. So ClickUp, it has both board and Kanban and list view, and just like the way that they organize, like it's got a really nice UI. I just like the way that they organize things. I don't know. It's just how my brain works.
Yeah. I'd be curious to you, like when you're actually evaluating software, I'm just a curious thing. Within how long of using the software do you kind of make that decision of this is not a piece of crap, but like this is just not up to snuff? Because I feel like the more you work in this space, the more you can pretty quickly, determine that. And I'd be curious what factors you look at.
Yeah, you're probably the same as me, where like I sign up to everything and try it, and pretty quickly I can make my estimation of if it's something that I would use or not.
And what do you look at?
I mean, I think a lot of it, I could, I think I use my software background. Like I can kind of tell how they're architected to see like if it can grow, to support, a lot of things look really nice if you've just got a few things in there.
Yep.
But how does it handle when you've got thousands or, more? How hard is it to move around and do things? So things like that. I don't know. I don't have a checklist of things I look for.
It's weird. I mean, definitely like UI, UX and things like that play a role in it. But like what you mentioned, you kind of just get a feeling as you start using it that it's just like, this is going to be good. This is scalable, and it's great having that background where you can actually evaluate it. I'm looking at ClickUp right now, and it's funny because even just the marketing website that they have, it's very clean. They have a cool color scheme. It stands out. It's purple, and it looks nice. And I'm like, it makes me want to sign up and see what it's all about. So that's they're definitely serving the purpose.
Yeah. Another one. So I used to use Trello quite a bit. I've actually moved all my Trellos into Airtable. So Airtable can replace Trello very easily. it has the same view, it has the same functionality of moving stuff from one board to another.
Are there more API endpoints, essentially like triggers with Airtable than something like Trello? Or with your extension? Yes, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
I don't know. I never played much with the Trello API.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'm guessing that they probably have more triggers
Gotcha.
because, yeah, it's probably got a little bit more structure around the way that they do things, whereas Airtable is a
It's
bit
so
more.
open that
Yeah,
some of their triggers are quite broad. You can
right,
focus them
right.
down, but
And you got to kind of build the functionality or build the trigger that you need.
sure. Yep.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And you typically work with companies that use G Suite, or are you open? Like, what I guess, okay, a new company comes to you and they say, I'm guessing one of the early questions that you asked is what is your software stack and what are you looking to do? Is there any required software that you make them use? Like, I won't work with them unless they're willing to use Airtable, or is that G Suite or some type of CRM? Like, what do you have any criteria in that area?
So it used to be, up until 6 months ago, we would only do stuff that made sense for our software stack. And so there would be times where somebody already had something that they had a developer build and they wanted us to take it over. And I'd say, no, we'll rebuild, but that'll take time. And so it used to be, it was just around our software. But now we haven't, although mainly because all of our interactions have been mostly with the Airtable community. Airtable is definitely core to that. So I'd say Airtable, but it depends. It depends because we kind of, if we're doing implementation work, then I'm getting to the point where Airtable is going to be involved in some extent. It may not be the core database, but it's going to likely be involved in some way. But we also market directly to companies that don't want to build their own integration connector to Zapier. Maybe they don't have the development resources. And so they partner with us to build that custom connector.
Okay.
And so we have, we're in talks with a couple companies. We haven't finalized anything yet, but that's another avenue that we've explored.
Okay, interesting. So like what would you say is if someone were listening and they needed help, specifically Airtable, because I know no one better at Airtable than you based on just what we've talked about and what you've built out, what would kind of the criteria be of, do you work with them to then like figure out their business process, or do you typically like the client to have a full idea of what they already want to do? Like it sounds like there's probably some level of consulting involved in your services, and that's one of the things that's tough to hand off to an employee. And I think that kind of comes back to that. But like, what does your process typically look like from client outreach to actually turning them into a customer and seeing if they're actually a good fit for your services?
Yeah, so the good and bad about Airtable is the flexibility. So the good thing is it can kind of do everything. The bad thing is that it can kind of do everything, which means every client that we've talked to has a very unique use case. And but usually they're coming to us with their use case of saying, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. Airtable is easy for anybody of any skill level to engage with, but then they realize like, oh, this is kind of getting above my skill level. But they're used to doing things in Excel. I'm sure, I don't know what the percentage is, but many businesses, in fact, I'm about to engage with a new client that's a very large company that basically runs on Excel, and we're going to move them into Airtable. And so that transition, I think there's many companies out there that still function within Excel, and that's their workflow.
I'm actually speaking to someone a little bit later this week who just started a company around helping configure Excel for companies. And, I'm torn by it because I think at the very least use something like Sheets because it has a lot more API integration endpoints. But at the end of the day, like if you're looking at Google Sheets, why would you not use Airtable? And
Right.
a client that we're actually just about to work with, we're actually migrating them over from Google Sheets to Airtable. So that's
Yep.
I think that Sheets and Excel had a purpose, but when you talk about they're not like a proper database. So I think maybe just break something down really quick. Airtable is a proper database in the sense that a row has to be formatted. Like say that you have a function set for a row, it goes across the entire row. Whereas in Excel, like you can literally pick a random cell and a random row and a random column and do a function, and that makes it so it doesn't function all that well. You can make an Excel sheet or a Google sheet take a very long time to run all these formulas and things going on because you just have so many random things running at random places. Whereas a proper database is formatted in a way and built to do lookups and relational information and things like that in a way that makes sense. So Airtable can really handle that kind of stuff very well, whereas Excel, you very quickly start seeing the limitations of it just from the relational aspect of actually creating two records in two different tables, I guess bases in this extent, and connecting them and feeling like they're actually connected versus just like a lookup. Like a VLOOKUP is not a connection, it's just a lookup. So
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I think a lot of people, they know that Excel has many limitations and bringing that a little bit more modern into Airtable is a natural transition where they feel comfortable. So usually they're coming to us with a process. So, a lot of it is helping them flesh that out, define it, and then from there, because it isn't a known process of what the output's going to look like I can't, maybe a little bit different for you of implementing CRMs. Like every new customer, I can't, it's completely different than the last one, which is good and bad.
Yeah, the efficiency and the
Yeah.
scalability becomes difficult when
Right.
the more custom that you get. And I think that's just I think the goal is in the future to build more templates out. Like the more clients that we work with, I'm feeling the same with you, the more you can get a general idea of, what a general client needs. And then at least you could build a correlation so that initial call when you talk with them and you see something, if you had seen it before a little bit different, then you have a better idea of the scope of work. Whereas if you've never seen it before, there's going to be a massive involvement for, this diagnosis phase of figuring out like, what is this scope of work even going to look like? Because we don't even understand. This is totally new to us. So I think the more companies you work with, but then you're just kind of storing this information in your brain. And that's where things become difficult too, because it's like, at the very least, it seems like you are always going to have to be on that initial call to understand the scope of work and the actual client needs of. I don't think you can ever remove yourself from that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, for sure. But if that's, at least for that first step, that's kind of the first step is where I'm just involved in that initial, but then have a team that does the implementation. But it's true. When I first started doing Airtable projects, like you kind of play with Airtable. So I thought I knew it, but I didn't really knew it until I was really doing some more complex stuff. And now I feel like I've got definitely a better grasp of it. But that first project was pretty painful. I grossly underestimated how long it would take.
Oh yeah.
And lost money on that.
I mean, but
Actually,
that's the way that it is in this space, right? Like, your
right.
initial clients are a learning curve and they're getting massive value from you learning on them, as bad as that sounds. Like it's a win-win in that regard. You're, losing money because the project is much larger than you thought. And at that point too, you're probably not comfortable with like, is this actually a scope change or is this part of the project? And often when you're learning, you just kind of include it all. And then you really get hit on the pricing with that. But what you learn from that and the confidence you get of like, shoot, I just built something that a $3 million a year, revenue business is running their infrastructure on. Like that's value right there. That it just validates everything about your business.
Yeah, for sure.
So I have one more question, and then I think like anything that you want to bring up or ask or talk about, more than happy to before we kind of end it. I'm curious, have you had any experience with Coda, and has that, if you have dove in, because I know they're in a way trying to be the replacement for Google Sheets, Google Docs, but they also have this big piece to it that is almost like an Airtable replacement. And I've definitely
Yep.
gone back and forth. I'm still using Airtable as that core, but I'm using Coda in a big place in my company. I don't know. I'm in a weird spot with it. Like, I like the competition. I think it's great for both companies. But what's your feeling on that if you have used it?
I have, I've signed up, I've played with it. I haven't adopted it. So I feel like at least where it's at now is that it's almost that paradigm of where it's trying to be all things
Yep.
for all people,
Mm-hmm.
but not great at any one thing.
Yep.
And so that's probably why I haven't adopted it. Everybody, I mean, I think it can get there. I think it definitely has promise, and is cool, but it wasn't enough for me to fully adopt.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that. Like, there are people that are using it as a project management. Some people using it as a CRM. Some people using it as like a storage database, and just and other people just using it as a shared, document that you can comment back and forth on. And I think one of the big things that I've noticed is the longer tables you get, it gets a little bit laggy, the page, whereas Airtable is definitely more built for that type of thing. But one of the cool man, definitely keep an eye on Coda though, because they're doing some really cool stuff with like buttons. So within a table, essentially like an Airtable or whatever, but within Coda, you can have another column that's labeled as a button, and it's just a clickable button. And you can trigger it then to be an automation. So when I click this button, you can have it update, this row and this row and this row, or, these 3 different rows with this value within this column. Or you can have the clicking of the button create a row in a different column, or I guess essentially like a different base. And you can have these triggers that are very user friendly. So I have a few things set up where, like, one of my clients, they could go in and we have a bug report built out for that. And it works really well for bug reporting because the client can literally just type or, click the button of saying, confirmed complete. And that means that he went on the site, he took a look at it, and the bug is no longer existent. And we have that trigger a few things on the back end. And I know Coda is doubling down on that aspect because it's a very user-friendly thing where you can literally hide all of these confusing rows and just have literally a button that your client can see and just do massive actions, push over to Slack and all this stuff just based on clicking one button. And it's a very cool concept that they've been working out with, and it's been fun to play around with. But it's overwhelming too. The amount of things you can do is like, holy crap, like I'm overwhelmed. So, but
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But, and you have seeing what I haven't been able to fully adopt is getting my customers into something like a Coda where you can really collaborate with them. That's a challenge that I've had where they still just prefer email. I do have some on Slack, but trying to get them to adopt something like that.
Yeah, it's funny because I haven't had an issue with it, but it's part of my onboarding. So once they make that initial diagnosis phase payment, I have an automation, create a Coda doc from a template, and it invites the customer to that document. And I only work with companies that use G Suite and Copper CRM. So inherently, they're already using G Suite. And how do you get into Coda? Well, there's a login with Google button. So there's no overhead of that. And then it's also a file that exists within their Google Drive. And yeah, at the end of the day, like, I'm sure it's a little bit confusing initially and things like that. But the more that I keep my note, like, I'm almost just using it for myself. And this is where I'm building out all the documentation for them. And then I will tag them, and they just get an email alert that says, hey, and it's a comment, like, to resolve it, click here, and they click there and they can respond to it and then resolve the comment. So they don't even necessarily need to be up in front in Coda. They're really being pulled in whenever I tag them within it. And for me, it's really just my storage place for all of our shared documentation. Because, like, where do you share or like store documentation with clients right now? How does that actually work for you guys?
Yeah, and so that's where, so my new customers, I still need to figure that out. The old ones, so one of the challenge is they already had, so like one of my customers has, was already using Basecamp. So Basecamp was their project management. And so instead of trying to get them to adopt what I was using, I went into Basecamp, into their environment. And, and so depending on the client, some of them I have to work within their world instead of trying to get them to come into mine.
Yeah, it's very difficult though with that, because like there's a standardization that I feel like you need to have in order to stay sane and to stay on top of all of your clients. That it's like, I've talked to some of my clients as well, because every client of ours, they're on some type of monthly commitment. And at the end of the day, some clients are thinking like, well, why do I have to keep paying monthly if some of these automations that you built are kind of just like running? And there's a cost associated with keeping your entire business model and processes top of mind for our team at the end of the day. That, there's so many times where I've been sleeping and waking up having an idea, literally working through automation in my dreams, or jumping in the shower and like thinking through something and solving it for one client, be like, oh, this would be awesome for this client as well. And what's the value of that, keeping that mental mind share that exists. So there's a lot that goes into kind of that, in addition to just the monitoring and the maintenance and the upkeep that comes with that. And it's tough to get that across until you have a few of those moments and you show them the value there. And like, this one idea that we just had because you're front of mind, that probably just saved you 10 hours a week. What's the value of that? Well, more than the X amount that you're paying us per month. So, but so.
You've got some exciting dreams there.
Yeah. Oh man, I had a very messed up dream, specifically about copper. I was trying to invest in them and in the dream. And then I was just like, I woke up and I literally asked Google to remind me of how to start a VC firm, because I found out that was the only way that I can invest in copper. And then I woke up and I looked at my phone and I'm like, why did I think that was a good idea? Like, I'm not going to start a VC for, like, what is wrong with me? But it's just the stuff that happens when your mind just lives and breathes all this stuff. You have some very funky things going on.
We could build a fully automated VC firm,
right? Oh, that's great. No, that would actually be kind of a cool experiment to do, because there's value there where a lot of VC firms are a little bit outdated in what they do, and I really do see a massive benefit to having a solution for a VC firm, because a lot of VC firms are similar in that they need that customer relationship management and they need that platform. And there's just so many similarities between it. That's definitely an area that's been interesting to me. Have you found any specific market segments, industry verticals that have been interesting to you aside from the VC space?
So that's definitely one of our challenges, is trying to, go after that. I'd probably say between financial services, real estate is one that we've made some traction in, and then because workflow automation is a horizontal, it's not a vertical. It's tough to nail down, and so we haven't been able to really do that, other than definitely VC firms. Like it's pretty evident, like I'll get direct firms reaching out to us. It's pretty clear that we kind of are the experts in that within the Airtable world. But no, that's definitely something that's on our to-do list to try to nail down.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because like once you do figure out one of those verticals that makes a ton of sense, that's where you actually at least start seeing some overlap, or at least some flexibility of, so for example, we work a lot with home improvement type companies, home service companies. So we have a painting firm, we have a bathroom, kitchen, we have a roofing company. And as different as they are, they have a very similar process. Like you have that initial meeting, and then from there you have the proposal and the estimate or whatever. And it starts being really consistent to the point where we can actually go to a new company in a similar type of service and implement kind of the same type of infrastructure with just a few tweaks to their specific needs. But implementation for them and the scope of work for them is so much more consistent than now, oh, hey, today we're going to this ABC Corp and they have a crazy custom process because they're a cutting edge company that, they're trying to build their process in Zapier and they're using, 60 to 80, zaps, which is totally overkill for what should be done, and it's not efficient. Diving into one of those projects is just, it's a lot. And I question every single day of like, do we just focus on what is repeatable and what makes sense and what's really helping these companies grow from, a couple million to a few million, or do we, start expanding? Because I love dealing with new companies and seeing what they're working on, and but does that mean that that's the right business move to make for your company?
Right, for sure. Yeah, and even especially with Airtable, like the VC firms that we have, they're not all using it as a CRM, and so even though they're the same type of company, they're using Airtable for different things. So some are still using a third-party CRM, but they're using Airtable for some other workflow that they've got. So it gets very difficult to try to replicate the same workflow.
Yeah, like that two-way sync. Essentially, like we had a potential client reach out once. They were using a CRM and they were using Airtable, and they're like, half our team loves using Airtable, the other half of the team loves using the CRM. How do we sync that data back and forth? And I'm like, it's not that easy. But there are some workarounds and stuff. But at the end of the day, it didn't make sense. That like, I think it makes more sense to get your team to fully embrace Airtable or to fully embrace a CRM, because this is a bit much for.
Well, yeah, we have a client who, half the team prefers Google Sheets and the other half prefers Airtable, and so they want to be between Google Sheets.
It's really rough. Sometimes you just need someone higher up to be like, this is the decision that we're making, and and push it, because people hate change. People love what they're used to, and even that move from Excel to Google Sheets is the biggest pain that I've ever experienced when I was an IT company. It is incredibly painful, even though they are so incredibly similar. It's just, what people are used to, and people hate learning something new. Spending that extra 10 seconds to look into the files menu to figure out where something is versus before they remember the shortcut or whatever, or exactly where it was, the level of frustration. And people don't want to take that, 3-month learning curve that it's going to take to become proficient in it. And, and that's something that we're constantly going to be experiencing in this business is but it's also the fun in it, I guess.
For sure.
So is there anything else that I guess comes to mind that you want to talk about, or if not, feel free to just talk about, how people can find you, and we can kind of end it out.
Yeah. So I was just your scenario of trying to do the two-way sync. I was just going to put a plug for our Airtable connector. So one of the if you go onto the Airtable community site that they've got, one of the biggest challenges is people trying to work more with the API, and in particular with Zapier, and frustrations with the limitations that come from the Zapier connector. And so what we did was we faced those same limitations and decided to that there'd be an opportunity there. So it took several months, but we built a Zapier connector that does very advanced stuff with Airtable, and we have a one-way sync right now. We have plans for a two-way sync, but it can do many other things. It can get updates on or do triggers on updates, which is one of the most highly requested features, in many other things. And so that really is a game changer for Airtable when you layer on the brains of using Zapier to perform automations in the background, is what takes Airtable from just a data storage to allowing it to be a workflow system.
Yeah.
So Openside is experts in that, and doing a lot of cool stuff in that world. And so openside.com, you can check us out. I'm just Dan at openside.com.
For sure. I'll link it in the show notes, and I could definitely vouch for it as well. I think that's one of the things that if you dive into Zapier, I think a lot of the connectors, the triggers, and the actions that are built are the very common use cases. But once you start going a little bit deeper, there's a lot of needs that you have. And there's a very specific one that always sticks with me with Airtable. And that's this very powerful trigger is that you can create a new view within Airtable and have it so, if this box is checked or if this value is this, then it could be shown into the new view. And the addition of that row, that row into the new view, it will trigger an automation. But as Dan made very clear that like that's a one-time thing. If you then remove it and then you add it back, that trigger no longer exists, no longer works. It's a very specific use case, and it's tough to explain unless you've really played around with it, but you start seeing very quickly how limited some of the triggers are through Airtable, and I wouldn't have expected, it to function the way that it does, but that's where he's gone and built things to work around that. So I'll for sure, I will have a link up for that, and maybe we can even get a coupon code or something specific. That'd be great.
Yeah.
So cool. Hey, I appreciate, spending the time. This has been really enjoyable, and I'm sure, we can catch up again in the future to kind of see where things are going. And I'm sure we'll be working in the future as well, because you're definitely the go-to Airtable expert.
For sure. Appreciate it.
Yep, for sure. Okay, cool, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
See ya. This is Alex Bass with Analysis Paralysis. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. The funny thing about podcasting is there's really no standardized way to leave reviews and to really support kind of the creators. I'm doing this simply because I enjoy talking to people about this type of content, and I love sharing it with you guys as well. There's a lot of work that goes into editing the episodes, and we spend a lot of time listening to them and reviewing them and pulling out teasers and everything. So if you appreciate what we're doing, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can go to iTunes. I have a link, aparalysis.com/review. It's always tough asking for this type of thing, but genuinely, it's the only thing that could really help us thrive and grow. We don't have a massive community, but we have many of you that really want to just help, and this would really, really help. So thank you so much for listening, and if you're interested at all in automation, efficiency, CRM, business process, then feel free to reach out to me directly at Alex H. Bass on Twitter, or you can email me at abass@aparalysis.com. I would love so much to talk to many of you. Some of you have already reached out, and we've had awesome conversations. All right, thank you so much.